The evening air in Lagos was thick and heavy as Chidi closed his shop. The tired glow of streetlights painted the cracked pavements with gold, and distant horns merged into one endless sound. This was his home, these narrow streets where vendors sold suya to laughing children, where aunties sat outside their doors gossiping. Chidi had known this life forever. The peeling walls of his small tailoring shop, the humming of his sewing machine, the scent of freshly ironed fabric. It wasn't much, but it was his world. And yet tonight, as he carefully locked the rusty iron gate and tucked the keys into his pocket, a strange unease followed him. It clung like the humidity after rain. Maybe it was the fight that had broken out at the corner shop earlier, or the rumor swirling that Chief Nnamdi, a wealthy businessman with a dark reputation, had been seen around the neighborhood more often than usual. Chidi felt his heartbeat quicken as he thought of his sister, Ada. He had made a sacred promise long ago to protect her. She was all he had left. From the day their father died and their mother's hands grew weak with years, Chidi became Ada's shield. Even as they grew up and she learned to fend for herself, fiercely independent, laughing loud and strong, Chidi never stopped worrying. That was what an elder brother did. That night, Ada was waiting for him at home. She looked tired, her arms folded as she leaned against their peeling wooden door. "Chidi," she said, her voice trembling just enough for him to notice. "Chief Nnamdi is following me." Her words hit him like a cold wind. Nnamdi was dangerous. Everyone knew that. Rich, powerful, never told no. And now he had set his eyes on Ada. Chidi's hands tightened into fists. "No one will touch you," he swore. "As long as I'm alive." Ada searched his face and nodded. Deep inside, she wanted to believe him. The next day, Nnamdi appeared at Chidi's shop. The businessman's polished shoes and expensive cloth looked ridiculous against the cracked floor and faded walls. "Your sister is special," Nnamdi began in a silky voice that made Chidi's stomach twist. "But you can't keep her forever. Let me make this easy. Take this money. Forget your pride. Let me take care of her." Nnamdi tossed a fat envelope onto the counter. Chidi's heart pounded. That was more money than he had seen in years, enough to buy a new sewing machine, pay debts, and finally leave the noisy streets of Lagos for a small house in Popocos. A house where his mother could rest, where Ada could live free. For one dizzying moment, Chidi pictured it all, sunlight streaming through big windows, green hills outside, and Ada laughing without fear. But then he heard her voice again, trembling in the dark. "Chief Nnamdi is following me."
See you in part 2 of the Sacred
and
Bond,
shoved it back
where
into
secrets
Nnamdi's
go
hands.
scatter and destinies go
"Never,"
shift.
Chidi whispered, his eyes burning. That was when the real trouble began. First, someone shattered the shop window in the dead of night. Then, customers began disappearing, owing him money he never saw again. Rumors followed him like shadows. On the street, people avoided him. When he walked home at night, he felt eyes on him. Even Ada, brave as she was, began to look over her shoulder. And then, one rainy evening, she was gone. Chidi's hands were slick with rain as he stood outside their house, calling her name into the dark. Thunder cracked overhead like a gunshot. She didn't answer. No one had seen her. That was when Nnamdi called. "Your sister is safe," he drawled into the phone. "But if you want her back, you know what to do." Chidi hardly heard the rain anymore. All he could feel was the weight in his chest, his promise like a chain tightening around him. He had one thing left, his savings. The money he had scraped together for years to buy that house in Popocos. The house that would mean they were free. That house was his dream. But Ada was his life. When Chidi finally walked into Nnamdi's compound that night, he was soaked through to his bones. Thunder roared outside as the gate clanged shut behind him. Nnamdi sat in a grand chair like a king, gold watches gleaming on his wrist, smug and sure. "So," he smiled, "you finally understand." Chidi dropped the bundle of money onto the floor. "Where is my sister?" he demanded, his voice trembling with rage. Nnamdi waved a hand, and two men appeared from the shadows. Between them was Ada, hands trembling, eyes bright with fear. Chidi rushed to her, pulling her close as if to shield her forever. "I kept my part," Chidi said, his throat raw. "We are leaving." But Nnamdi only laughed, a sharp, hollow sound that bounced off the walls. "You're leaving." Nnamdi gestured around him like a god surveying his kingdom. "No one leaves me unless I say so." And then Chidi saw them, 3 more men stepping into the light. Time seemed to slow. Thunder exploded outside, rain beating the windows like a wild heart. Chidi's fingers dug into Ada's hands. Everything he'd worked for was gone. His shop, his savings, even that future in Popekos, all lost in one terrible night. And yet none of that mattered. Only one thing mattered, Ada. He pushed her behind him as the men advanced. Blood rushed in his ears. Nnamdi's smug face, Ada's scared breath against his back, these were the only things that felt real. Somewhere deep inside, Chidi felt his father's voice, "Your bond with your sister is sacred. Protect it with your life." And as lightning split the skies outside, Chidi decided he would fight. The first punch was like thunder, knocking one of Nnamdi's men to the ground. Chidi's fist moved before his thoughts could catch up. Another swung at him and missed. Chidi tackled him into a chair that shattered into pieces. Ada screamed as she pulled him back, but Chidi couldn't stop. Every ounce of fear, anger, and desperation poured into him until he was a force of nature. Nnamdi backed away, eyes wide as the men fell, one after another. And then Nnamdi ran. Chidi grabbed Ada's hand and they burst into the rain-soaked street. Lagos was a blur around them, a stormy landscape of battered houses and distant headlights, as they ran, breathless, soaked, and free. But freedom felt fragile tonight. Chidi knew Nnamdi wouldn't stop. Would never stop. And as they disappeared into the dark, their hands still intertwined, a single question followed them like a ghost on the wind. Could Chidi truly keep his sister safe forever, or had this sacred bond only led them deeper into danger? Lightning flashed one last time, and the screen fades to black. The rain had eased into a faint drizzle as Chidi and Ada slipped into the shadows of Lagos. Every face they passed seemed to hide a threat. Every set of headlights that appeared around the corner sent a shiver racing up Chidi's spine. He held Ada's hand so tightly it almost hurt. "We need to hide," he whispered, voice hoarse. Ada nodded, eyes wide with fear. They hurried past shuttered stores and rusting iron gates until they reached an abandoned building, one of those old, unfinished houses where no one dared to go after dark. Inside, they huddled together on the cold concrete floor, breathless and trembling. For a long moment, there was nothing but their breathing and the distant sound of dogs barking. "You could have left me," Ada finally said, her voice so quiet it was almost swallowed by the dark. Chidi pulled her close. "Never," he murmured. That was never even a thought. He felt Ada shudder as she leaned into him. And for the first time that terrible night, Chidi allowed himself to close his eyes. But there was someone who hadn't closed his eyes at all. Chief Nnamdi. Back at Nnamdi's compound, the businessman raged like a trapped lion. Guards moaned on the floor where Chidi had fought them off. Blood stained his marble tiles. "You fools," Nnamdi hissed. "Find them. Bring me their heads." And with that, his men melted into the night like hunting dogs let off their chains. When dawn broke, grey and tired, Chidi and Ada set off again. They took back roads and alleys. Chidi kept his hoodie up, and Ada kept close. But the city was small when someone powerful was looking for you. And Nnamdi was very powerful. By mid-morning, Chidi began to feel it, that icy prickling at the back of his neck, the sense that someone was close. He grabbed Ada's arm and pulled her into a tiny shop tucked between two houses. It was owned by Mama Nkechi, the kind old woman who once told him, "Your bond with your sister is sacred. Hold on to it." When Mama Nkechi saw them, her hands flew to her mouth. "Chidi, my son." "Ada. What happened to you both?" Chidi hurried to close the shop door. "No time to explain, Mama. Nnamdi is after us." Mama Nkechi's brow furrowed. "That man has long fingers," she said in a low voice. "You cannot hide forever in Lagos." And she was right. That night, they ran again. Chidi decided their only hope was to leave the city altogether. Pack whatever they had, slip onto a bus headed east, back to Popokos, back home, where Nnamdi's reach would be shorter and the hills and forests could hide them. In the cramped bus station at the edge of Lagos, they kept their faces down and their hands linked. Thunder roared overhead. And just as they reached the ticket counter, Ada froze. "Chidi," she whispered, gripping his arm. He followed her gaze across the crowded station and his heart stopped. Nnamdi's men. There were 3 of them, lounging like they had nowhere to be, but their eyes were sharp, searching. Chidi's hands turned clammy. They needed a distraction. He bent close to Ada. "On my signal," he breathed. When one of Nnamdi's men moved to scan the crowd again, Chidi grabbed an empty wooden crate from a nearby pile and hurled it across the station. It crashed into a stack of chairs with a terrible clatter. Every head turned. And Chidi pulled Ada into the chaos. The bus roared out of Lagos as rain began again, this time heavier, like the city was crying them a farewell. Ada sat with her head on Chidi's shoulder, eyes closed, hands still trembling. Chidi stared into the rainy darkness outside the bus window and let his thoughts drift homewards, to Popokos, to his mother waiting in their village house, to the green hills that had watched him grow up. But even as he imagined their sanctuary, Chidi knew Nnamdi wouldn't give up. And the question dug into him like a thorn. If Nnamdi followed them all the way to Popokos, would they ever truly be safe? By the time they reached Popokos the next day, the skies had cleared. Sunlight dappled the red dirt paths and the hills glowed lush and green. Chidi felt a fragile relief as he led Ada to their mother's house, where their mother greeted them with tearful prayers and hot food. That first evening in Popokos was quiet. They ate together by lamplight, laughter and stories filling the air like they hadn't in years. And for a moment, Chidi allowed himself to believe they had outrun the past. But Nnamdi was never far behind. 2 days later, as dusk painted the hills in gold, a sleek black SUV pulled up at the village crossroads. And inside, Nnamdi smiled a slow, dark smile as he stared at the hills ahead. "They can hide," he muttered to his men. "But they cannot hide forever." And so our story teeters on the edge. Chidi and Ada, hearts full of hope yet tainted by fear, tucked away in their village home, and Nnamdi, dangerous and determined, closing in. And the sacred bond that kept them together. That was their only light in the gathering dark. What you just watched is only the beginning. The real storm is coming. Will Chidi and Ada survive what's ahead? Or will their sacred bond be tested beyond repair? Part 2 of this story go choke, I no go lie, so if you no want miss abeg hit that like button, subscribe sharp, and turn on your bell notification. Trust me, you go feel for your chest. See you in part 2 of The Sacred Bond, where secrets go scatter and destinies go shift.